haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars had grown old. They no longer burned with the reckless heat of youth, but shimmered dimly, their radiance bleeding into the void like the last breath of a dying god. Once, these constellations had guided fleets of a golden empire, had bathed the hulls of god machines and warriors forged in fire and gene code. But now, the firmament was pale with dust, scattered with the ashes of suns and shattered worlds. Fenris, the wolf world, turned slowly beneath the crimson sky. Ice howled across its mountains and seas, and its winds carried the memory of a time when the heavens wept fire and the stars cried out names of glory. A great citadel loomed above the ice cliffs, the Fang, silent, watching, empty. It was here the saga began, or perhaps ended, for Leman Russ, the Wolf King, the Lord of Winter and War, had vanished into myth nearly 10 millennia ago. To most, he was legend, the howling blade of the Emperor, the vengeful spirit of Fenris made flesh. But now, the echoes of his name returned, like ghost songs carried on solar winds. Across the warp, in whispers and dreams, the name of Russ stirred once more. And with it, a storm. Not a storm of weather, but a fate. At the edge of the segmentum obscurus, far beyond the light of the Astronomicon, a world burned. It had once been called Harrowen, a bastion of the Imperium, a shrine to the old oaths sworn in the time of the Great Crusade. Now it was aflame, scoured by fire and claw, not from Xenos nor heretic, but something stranger, something older. Amidst that dying world, a lone figure stood upon the ruins of a cathedral, its blackened spires still whispering the psalms of a long-dead priesthood. Cloaked in furs thick as the Fenrisian winter, his eyes burned with a blue fire that defied the stars. He looked skyward, toward the void, and felt it, the weight of ancient promises breaking. Leman Russ had returned, but not as he was. He had walked the shadow realms of the Eye of Terror. He had battled demons whose names were unspoken and wandered beyond the reach of time. He had stood at the edge of the galaxy and stared into the abyss of immortality, and it had stared back. Now the Wolf King bore wounds that no blade had made, scars carved by silence, by waiting, by regret. He had found no cure in the stars, no peace, only prophecy. He remembered the day he left. The halls of the Fang had echoed with mourning, though no soul dared weep. He had looked upon his sons, Bjorn the fell-handed, who had fought beside him at Prospero, and others whose names were already fading. He had said he must go, that the All-Father's will called him beyond the veil. He had sworn to return at the final battle. But deep within, even then, he had known. What waited was not a war, but a choice. And now, that choice had come. The galaxy he had known was unrecognizable. The Imperium was a rotting colossus, devouring itself from within. Its high lords were hollow kings on thrones of ash. Guilliman, the brother he once called rival and kin, walked again, but changed, tempered in fire and mourning. And Horus, his death still echoed in Russ's memory like a howl unfinished. It was not the galaxy he had fought for, not the vision his father had promised. And so, the Wolf King stood at the edge of it all, torn between fury and sorrow. Beneath him, the ground cracked. From the black soil rose a symbol scorched in fire, a wolf devouring its own tail. Fenrir reborn, a sign of what was coming. Immortality was a curse, he realized, not for the flesh but the soul. For what is eternal must endure every failure, every betrayal, and carry them into eternity. There is no rest for gods that bleed, only silence. Behind him, a presence stirred. Not demonic, not divine, mortal. A woman, clad in tattered robes of a forgotten order, bearing the seal of the Sisters of Silence. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was raw with disuse. "You were never meant to return." Russ did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the stars, on Fenris, far away, burning beneath the aurora. "I never left," he answered. The silence between them was heavy with memory. She knew who he was. She had seen the legends, read the forbidden scripts sealed in the black vaults. Yet the man before her was not a god. He was weary. His shoulders, broad enough to bear mountains, were bowed not by age, but by sorrow. "There is a reckoning coming," she said. "Your sons still wait. But the Imperium is no longer yours to save." Russ's laugh was a low growl, ancient and broken. "Then perhaps it is mine to end." She flinched, not at the words, but at the truth behind them. For in his eyes burned not hope nor vengeance, but something far older, a resignation, a terrible wisdom. Leman Russ had not come back to lead. He had come back to choose, to decide whether the Imperium, in its decayed glory, was worth the final howl. He remembered Prospero. He remembered the fire and the screams, the betrayal, the brother whose name still echoed in his dreams. Magnus, broken and reborn in the warp. He remembered their last battle, and the moment his blade had hesitated, not out of mercy, but doubt. That doubt had festered. It had grown. And now, 10,000 years later, it demanded an answer. The stars shifted. Across the void, something stirred. A signal, faint and corrupted, pulsed from the edge of Segmentum Pacificus. A world long thought lost. Varax Prime. An echo from the past. It bore the seal of the 11th Legion. The 11th. A secret buried so deep that even Leman Russ had been commanded to forget. He clenched his fists, blood running along his palms. The Emperor had lied. Not once, but countless times. And now the truth clawed its way from the grave. This was not a return. It was a reckoning. The stars wept in silence as the Wolf King turned his back on the burning cathedral. His eyes burned not with wrath, but clarity. He had crossed the darkness of eternity, endured the madness of the warp, and emerged not as a savior, but as a judge. The hunt had begun, and this time there would be no mercy. The void between stars was not empty. It hummed with old voices, fractured transmissions, and the dying echoes of forgotten wars. Between the currents of reality and the shadowed tides of the immaterium, Leman Russ travelled alone, entombed within a warcraft older than memory, scarred by warp storms and battle alike. Its runes no longer shone. Its machine spirit was a ghost, and yet it endured, like him. In the silence of the vessel, the Wolf King sat unmoving upon a throne of worn steel and frost-rimed bone. His eyes were half-lidded, lost in the currents of memory. Fenrisian sagas carved in his soul echoed louder than any astropath's cry. He had not spoken since the departure from Harrowen. No need, no words for what stirred inside him. The past pressed down upon him, not like a weight, but a wound. Magnus. He had dreamed of the red Cyclops again. The tower of the Cyclops shattered beneath his charge, howls rising in a chorus of vengeance, the howling of his sons as they burned Prospero to ash, the sorcerer's eyes staring back through time. Not in hate, but pity. He had followed orders that day, had obeyed his father's will. But in the eyes of the 1,000 Suns, he had become a monster, and perhaps he had never stopped being one. The ship's warp drives growled, lights flickered, then silence. Real space folded in. Before him stretched the ruins of Varax Prime. Russ stood slowly, His armoured boots echoed as he crossed the observation deck, and the void beyond came into view. Varax had once been a cradle of conquest, a jewel world forged by Mechanicum hands, gifted to a legion whose name was struck from every record, every memory. The 11th, the Forgotten Sons. Their legacy had been erased, their Primarch exiled or slain, and yet here it was, a world half consumed by void fire, its orbital ring shattered, its surface gouged by impact craters and tectonic scars, and yet, beneath it all, a signal, ancient, consistent, alive. Russ inhaled. He remembered Varax, briefly, once. He had passed it during the early Crusades, met its commanders, drank with their mortal lords. There had been laughter then, shared between Genekin, when such bonds still meant something. But even then, the 11th was strange, unsettling, quiet, too quiet. Then they vanished, and none spoke their name again. The Emperor had decreed silence, and Leman Russ obeyed. But now the silence was broken, and the wound reopened. The lander groaned as it descended. Smoke and ash churned through its viewports. Russ stood alone in its belly, clad not in golden plate, but darkened war gear, furs hanging like mourning veils from his shoulders. He carried no wolves now, no honor guard. They were all dead or lost. The great hunt had claimed many. Only silence remained. The surface of Varax greeted him with fire and ice. Molten rivers clashed with glaciers of black ice. Iron forests, twisted and petrified, stood like gravestones. The ground was littered with the bones of titans, hulks of broken knights and war engines rusting in eternal defeat. And then the voices began, faint, whispered, not from the warp, not demonic, but familiar. Our oaths were not forgotten. We waited. He comes. The executioner returns. Russ walked forward, one step at a time. His instincts screamed. The air was wrong. The gravity thinned, then thickened, like walking through memory. Yet he pressed on, toward a great black spire that rose in the distance. Broken, but not fallen. A citadel, a fortress of the 11th. Inside the walls were carved with symbols unlike anything in imperial lexicons. Geometric patterns, spirals within spirals, abstract, cold, beyond understanding. He passed a chamber where a fresco still clung to the ceiling, half scorched by plasma fire. It depicted a legion, faceless and unarmored, standing before the Emperor, not in reverence, but in judgment. His stomach twisted. At the heart of the citadel, he found the voice. A figure stood atop a platform of obsidian, facing a massive stasis crypt humming with restrained power. The woman from Harrowen. She turned, eyes unafraid. You came. As you were meant to, Russ growled. You said nothing of the 11th. You spoke in riddles. She inclined her head. Because the truth is a blade with no hilt. It wounds all who wield it. He looked past her, to the stasis crypt. Inside it, something moved. What lies in there? She stepped aside. One of your brothers. His breath stopped. He stepped closer. Through the glass-like barrier of the crypt, he saw a figure curled in sleep, or in containment. Power armor adorned in deep crimson. Hands bound in layered hexagrammic chains. A Primarch, untouched by time, eyes closed in peace or death. Russ reached out. His fingers hovered above the surface. The woman spoke again. He knew you would come. He dreamed of this moment for 10,000 years. The Emperor ordered their silence, their annihilation. But this one refused. He chose exile, isolation, and prophecy. Russ's jaw clenched. Why show me this now? She looked him dead in the eyes. Because the Imperium is already dead. You know it. Guilliman fights to save a corpse. The gods of the warp laugh behind veils of flesh. The ecclesiarchy reigns in your father's name, but he never wanted a religion. You return to judge what remains. He said nothing. She nodded at the crypt. Then judge. For a long time, there was only silence. Then Russ spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. His name? Malchior, she replied. He was the seer, the listener. His legion listened for futures, paths unchosen, realities fractured by war. When the Emperor asked him to stop, he refused. Russ turned away. And so I was sent. You were always his hand, she said. The one who obeyed. The one who killed. Did you ever wonder why? His silence was answer enough. She stepped closer, her breath a whisper in the cold. You were never meant to lead, only to end. The words struck like a thunderbolt. In that moment, Leman Russ, wolf, warrior son, felt the truth he had buried. He had not been made to build, only to destroy. Magnus, Malchior, the 11th, all judged, all silenced. And now he stood before the last decision. Behind him, the crypt pulsed, a heartbeat, a soul reaching out. He placed his hand on the control rune and hesitated. Wake him, he said at last. The woman nodded. It begins. Russ turned toward the ash-choked sky. Somewhere, across the stars, Guilliman prepared for another crusade. Somewhere, chaos stirred. Somewhere, the wolves still howled his name. But here, on Varax, something greater had stirred. A truth long buried beneath the edifice of the Imperium. The forgotten were waking, and their reckoning would not be denied. The silence shattered. A scream without sound echoed through the vault as stasis protocols unraveled, their containment fields flickering like dying stars. The crypt's coils hissed and vented ancient gases, exhaling 10,000 years of isolation into the cold chamber. Leman Russ did not move. He stood like a sentinel before the awakening tomb, yellowed eyes locked on the form that stirred within. The woman, whatever she truly was, stood beside him, her hands folded in still reverence. Then the figure inside opened his eyes, pale blue, not the molten gold of Russ, nor the crimson of Magnus, blue like still oceans beneath ice, clear, ancient, and unreadable. The locks disengaged with a heavy click. Chains of nullite and silver retracted. The crypt cracked open like a sarcophagus, and the figure stepped forward into the ruined hall, barefoot, armored, silent. For a moment, Leman Russ was uncertain. The figure before him did not radiate power. There was no crashing aura, no godlike weight of presence that most Primarchs bore, no rage, no judgment, only a quiet gravity, like a dying star. Malchior of the 11th stood tall, taller than Russ, by nearly a head, his features angular, severe, and still. His crimson armour bore no sigils, only blank plates where symbols once sat. His face was scarred not by war, but by time. The two brothers stared at one another. Neither spoke. It was Malchior who finally broke the silence. You came, he said, voice like the wind beneath glacier ice. As I foresaw. Russ's expression was unreadable. I was not sent. Not this time. Malchior's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite sadness. Then perhaps you are finally free. The words were strange, gentle, almost loving, but they stabbed deep into the Wolf King's marrow. Free. The word meant nothing to him. He had served the Emperor's will from the moment of his finding, through joy, through blood, through betrayal. He had hunted his kin, killed them, broken them, and still he was called loyal. Malchior circled the chamber, his fingers brushing the fresco walls. Varax has not changed. The ghosts still whisper. Russ frowned. What happened here? Malchior did not answer. Instead, He turned to the woman, his warden, or perhaps his priestess. "You woke me too soon," he said gently. "It is not yet time." She bowed her head. The wheel turns. The wolf has chosen. He looked back to Russ, searching his brother's eyes for something, perhaps anger or guilt. "You are as I remember." But heavier now. Worn, Russ's lips curled in frustration. "I am no prophet." "Speak plainly." Malchior's eyes narrowed. Then plainly, "The Imperium is dying. You see it. You smell it in the marrow of its bones." He stepped closer, the sound of his bare feet echoing. "The dream our father built is crumbling. Guilliman tries to sew golden thread into rot. The ecclesiarchy poisons faith with fire. The warp bleeds through the veil. And you hunt ghosts because you cannot face what you became." A deep growl rose from Russ's throat. "Do not mistake silence for weakness." "I mistake nothing," Malchior said, voice soft. "I only ask, why do you still serve?" Russ's fist tightened. He had no answer, not one he could speak aloud. He thought of the sons he had left behind, of Bjorn, his once pup, now a sarcophagus of fire and fury, of the howling halls of Asserheim, now filled with echoes and regrets, of the Emperor's face, obscured forever by golden lies and silence. Malchior's voice became colder. "You were the executioner, the leash, the necessary blade." "And you were the heretic," Russ snapped, "the seer who looked too far." Malchior nodded, unoffended. "Yes, I saw too much, too far. But I did not burn worlds. I did not damn a brother for pride. I did not silence truth for the sake of order." He stepped closer, until the brothers stood eye to eye. "I saw the wound in the Imperium before it was born. I begged the Emperor to stop. He refused. So did you." Russ barked a bitter laugh. "You would call me traitor then?" "No," Malchior said, "only blind." The word landed harder than any blow. Russ turned away, staring into the vault's distant shadows. "Why did he let you live?" "I do not know," Malchior said. "Perhaps even he feared the cost of killing a son. Or perhaps he foresaw this moment." Russ shook his head. "You speak in riddles." "Like Magnus." "Magnus looked outward," Malchior said quietly. "I looked inward." The distinction was chilling. Malchior turned, walking slowly to a rune-etched wall. He placed his palm against it, and the stone shimmered, revealing a map. No, a vision. Not stars, but threads, possible futures. Timelines collapsed and knotted into a web of chaos. "In one path," Malchior whispered, "the Imperium falls to the warp within 3 centuries. Guilliman dies. Terra burns." He touched another thread. "In another, the Mechanicus fractures. Mars becomes a god world ruled by AI. Humanity becomes prey to its own creations. Another. In a third, chaos wins. Not through war, but through faith." Russ felt his throat tighten. "And in your path?" he asked. Malchior turned to him, eyes full of sorrow. "In mine, we tear down the lie. We let the Imperium die, and something new is born from its ashes." Russ stared at the shifting threads. 100 horrors, 1,000 dooms, and one, just one, path of salvation. Bought through fire, through rebellion, through betrayal. His voice was raw. "Why show me this?" Malchior stepped forward. "Because you are the first who might choose." Silence settled again. In that silence, Russ felt the weight of every life he had taken, every brother buried, every choice made in obedience, and he wondered, was this his fate, to obey to the end, or to finally break the chain? Malchior extended a hand. "Come with me. Help me end it." Russ looked at the hand, then at the woman, at the map of futures, at the galaxy dying under its own lies, and he did not know what to do. But something in him, a feral, ancient part, howled not in rage, but in mourning. not for what had died, but for what had never lived. The storm that waited beyond the crypt was not of weather. As Leman Russ and Malchior stepped into the open winds of Varax, the black sky was torn with warp lightning. Unnatural storms birthed from the rift that bled at the edge of the segmentum obscurus. The once proud stars above this world now blinked like dying embers, lost behind clouds of ash and psychic unrest. Behind them, the vault sealed in silence. The woman, Malchior's warden or prophet, remained behind, fading into the stone as if she had never been. Russ looked to the horizon. The ruin of what once had been a citadel lay broken beneath them. Vast pylons of blackened iron jutted from the earth, remnants of a fortress built in defiance of time. He remembered this place once. Varax had been the 11th Legion's bastion, a citadel of visionaries and exiles. Now it was a grave of forgotten potential. Malchior did not look back. "The galaxy is not as you remember," he said. Russ scoffed. "I remember too well." Malchior stopped. "No, you remember what you were told. You remember the stories they let you keep." Russ turned slowly. "And what would you call your memory?" Malchior's eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. "Punishment." They walked in silence, descending the mountain path cut into the bones of the ancient fortress. Below, a shuttle waited, sleek, black, and of no recognizable design. It bore no markings, no sigils of allegiance, a craft beyond allegiance. As they reached the base, Malchior paused before boarding. "You can still leave," he said, not unkindly. "You are not bound." Russ said nothing, because he was bound, not by oath or duty, but by something far older, something he couldn't name. A thread tied around his soul since the day the Allfather found him beneath the Fenrisian moon. Malchior entered the ship. Russ followed. Within, there was no bridge, no crew. Only a single chamber, walls adorned with shifting silver light. Data streams of futures unspooled, visions and possibilities cycling like dreams in the mind of a god. Russ sat across from his brother. "You once had a legion," he said. "Now you wander with ghosts." Malchior nodded. "And you had sons. Now you lead none." The jab was not cruel, but it was true. Russ had been gone for centuries. The wolves had carried on in his name, driven by legend, duty, desperation. But he had not led them. He had left. He remembered the pain in Bjorn's voice the day he had departed. "Do not abandon them, my king." He had left anyway, because something in him had cracked. Not a break, but a hairline fracture, small but deep. And over the centuries, it had widened, quietly, invisibly. Malchior watched him. "Why did you come to me?" he asked. Russ looked down at his gauntlets. Scarred, ancient, still stained. "I dreamed of you," he said. A strange quiet passed between them. Malchior leaned forward. "Then you saw what I saw." "The truth beneath the rot," Russ growled low. "I saw visions. Death, fire, a corpse on a throne screaming without end." He gripped the edge of the bench. "I saw myself, kneeling, begging. I saw the walls fall and the stars go dark. I saw your face in the ashes." Malchior nodded. "And what did you feel?" Russ answered without thinking. "Relief." The word struck him as he said it, as if spoken by another. He stared at his hands. "I've carried the weight for so long," he whispered, "of what we became. What he made us." Malchior stood. "The truth is simple, brother. We were forged to be weapons, but a weapon cannot shape a future, only destroy it." He walked to the center of the chamber, and the silver light parted to reveal a star map, flickering systems and corridors of war. Red dots marked war zones. Black systems marked extinction. Entire sectors blinked in and out of existence as warp storms engulfed them. In the center, terror, still shining, still burning. Guilliman tries to hold it together, Malchior said, but even he cannot stop the unraveling. He builds a house upon the bones of liars. Russ stared. You would burn it all? Malchior turned, the cold blue fire in his eyes now unmistakable. No, he said. You would. Russ rose. I do not follow zealots. I am not a zealot, Malchior said. I am done with faith. What we need now is truth. No gods, no thrones, no golden lies. Russ bared his teeth. And what replaces them? Chaos, ruin. Malchior shook his head. Understanding, freedom, mortality. The last word hung heavy. Russ had not known death for millennia. None of them had, not truly. He had been torn apart, broken, poisoned, thrown into the void, and still he rose. Because he had been made that way, and for the first time, he hated it. Do you wish to die? Russ asked. Malchior smiled faintly. Yes. When it is done, a silence passed between them. Then Russ asked the question that had burned in him since the vault. Why me? Malchior turned. Because you were always the most loyal. And only the loyal can make betrayal holy. Russ stared at him, and for the first time, he understood. Not the logic, not the strategy, but the emotion, the grief. They were not rebels, they were orphans, not of the Emperor's death, but of his lies. The chamber dimmed, the ship hummed as it pierced the void between Varax and the wider galaxy. Outside, the stars trembled. Russ sat, heavy with silence. He did not yet know what path he had chosen, but he knew. The hunt had begun again, and this time it was not for prey, but for truth. The sky over Caractyrene was not a sky at all. It was a dome of rusted metal and flickering hollow lights, an artificial firmament projecting the illusion of dawn, while the true sun above burned behind industrial smog and faith-powered reactors. Once, Caractyrene had been a forge world, a jewel in the Mechanicum's spine of production. Now it was a reliquary of failing machines, of half-dead tech priests entombed in iron, of broken prayers whispered into cooling vents. The city of Ros Tertius stretched like a blister across the surface, vast and crumbling. Pilgrims dragged carts of scrap through streets that groaned beneath the weight of 1,000 failed revolutions. Manufactorums coughed smoke into the clouds, and great statues of the Omnissiah stared blind and corroded from their pedestals. Russ stepped from the ship cloaked in an environmental shroud. Even his transhuman lungs rebelled against the air, too thick with metal, too thin with meaning. Beside him, Malchior strode unmasked. I thought we'd arrive at a world, Russ muttered, not a tomb. Malchior's voice was thin, almost gentle. This is the cost of survival. The Imperium's definition of peace. Russ looked upon the people, emaciated, limping, hollow-eyed, children with servo skulls for toys, men branded with barcodes and holy seals, women muttering catechisms as they burned incense before vending machines that dispensed only ash. This was not life. This was liturgy sustained by death. Malchior led him through a tunnel of broken cogitators and fading lumen globes, down into the core of the city. They remember you here, Malchior said quietly. Russ glanced sideways. I never walked these streets. You walked all of them. In legend, in punishment. You are the Fang of Terror, the executioner. Here you are invoked when the air is too foul to breathe. They pray to you to end their suffering, Russ growled. I am no god. No, Malchior said. You're worse. You're real. They came to a place that had once been a cathedral. The bones of the Mechanicum's creed were still visible, archways of rusted iron, The shattered visage of the Omnissiah etched into the floor, but now it served another function. Inside, bodies hung from cables, dozens of them. Adepts, priests, and low-rank magi. Flayed open, dissected, preserved in status fields. Their organs glistened in the blue light. At the center stood a woman in bloodied robes. Russ paused. She was not of the Imperium, not anymore. Her augmentations were wrong. Her silhouette blurred in the light, not from cloaking tech, but from something older, forbidden. She turned as they entered, and her eyes, artificial, flickered with recognition. "So," she said, "the wolf returns." Russ tensed. "You know me?" "I studied you," she replied. "Long ago. When flesh was still useful, she approached, and Russ saw that her limbs were stitched with necrodermis, necron metal. Her spine rippled with pale circuitry. She was not a magos. She was something newer, or older. Malchior introduced her with a name that sounded like a curse. Magos liminal atrophis, once a riser, now awakened. She bowed mockingly. "I collect relics," she said, circling Russ. "You are one." "I am no one's trophy," Russ growled. "No," she smiled, "but you are a specimen." Malchior intervened. "We came for the data." Atrophis nodded. "I extracted it from the Cogitorium's core. The Mechanicus still worships the lie, but their archives do not." She led them deeper. The walls were pulsing with data matter, runes etched in psychoconductive alloys. Memory itself hummed through the floor. She activated a projection. A map of the Segmentum Solar appeared, the arteries of Imperial logistics, the edicts of Guilliman's reforged empire. But then it changed, flickering, overwriting itself. A hidden layer emerged, truth buried beneath propaganda. And Russ saw it. Entire sectors sterilized under the rubric of absolute control. Worlds silenced. Populations turned to biomass to feed forge worlds starving under the weight of war. Malchior pointed to a system outlined in red. Delios Kar, a shrine world. Population. 7 billion. Russ squinted. "What happened?" Malchior's voice was flat. "They doubted the word." Atrophis added, "They asked the wrong question in the wrong tone." The Inquisition initiated a full systemic rite of cauterization. Russ stared. "Exterminatus?" "No," Atrophis said. "Worse. Indoctrination camps. Neural rewriting. Families shattered and reconstructed under pain thresholds." Malchior turned to Russ. "This is the truth of the Imperium now. Not war, not faith, control. Guilliman seeks to save the body, but the soul," he gestured to the hanging corpses above, "has been sacrificed." Russ's fist clenched. He remembered terror. The ecclesiarchy standing atop the golden corpse of their father, proclaiming virtue while carving out heresy with power mauls. "I hunted heretics," he whispered, "but we knew they were false." "Now they are not heretics," Malchior said. "Now they are simply unbelievers." Russ turned away. The projection faded. He felt the pressure in his chest growing, like the weight of millennia he had ignored pressing down all at once. "I left to find purpose." Not ruin. Malchior stepped closer. "This is your purpose." Reckoning. Russ glared at him. "Reckoning brings only death." "And isn't that mercy?" Malchior asked. Silence followed. Atrophis handed Russ a small object, a shard of crystal, unassuming, black, humming with presence. "It belonged to one of your kind," she said, "a remembrancer embedded with a kill team. She recorded what Guilliman ordered them to do." On Niraxis, Russ felt the crystal pulse in his hand. "She died with it in her chest," Atrophis said, "buried beneath rubble, hidden." Waiting, Russ tucked it into his armor. He said nothing. But in that moment, Something changed in his eyes. Not belief, not certainty, but fracture, the kind that spreads when a dam begins to split. They returned to the surface as the artificial sky flickered. The machine spirit of the dome stuttered, revealing a glimpse of the real sky above. It was not blue, it was black, stars hidden behind veils of smoke and sorrow. Russ looked up. The galaxy no longer belonged to men or angels or monsters. It belonged to ghosts, and they were calling him home. The world of Neuraxis did not appear on any current Imperial star charts. Erased, not censored, not renamed. Erased. Like a wound that refused to scar, its memory had been surgically removed from history. Warp routes diverted. Astropathic echoes silenced. Even the Mechanicus, those lords of remembrance, held only fragments. Navigational anomalies, ghost signals, and censored logs bearing only coordinates and the phrase, Doctrina Redactus, by order of the Lord Commander. And yet, Russ found it. He followed the shard. The remembrancer's dying thoughts burned into obsidian memory, a pulse in his mind guiding him through the warp. It was no longer just curiosity. It was something else. A reckoning, or a return. His ship, the Black Fang, broke through the veil of warp storm with engines that growled like wounded beasts. The planet emerged through the mist, half wrapped in shadow, caught in the dying light of a sun far too red, far too old. Neuraxis, its surface was choked in ash and snow, mountains crowned in obsidian spires, cities sunken into ice. There was no beacon, no orbital defense, no answer to voxhails. The planet was silent. Russ stood in the viewing deck alone. He did not wear his warplate, not fully, only fragments, pauldrons marked by Fenrisian glyphs, a gauntlet that hummed with the heat of lost blood. His cloak dragged across the floor, torn by time and travel. His beard was longer now, streaked with grey like frost on stone. He was no longer the Wolf King. He was something older, more dangerous. Malchior approached. His eyes burned brighter than before. Like each truth they uncovered made him less mortal. "Do you know what happened here?" Russ asked. Malchior hesitated. "Only what she left us." Russ turned his eyes to the planet. "Then it's time we learned what was worth erasing." The drop to Neuraxis was uneventful. No orbital interference, no defense batteries, no welcoming party. The dead rarely greet their guests. They landed in the remains of a city. It had no name, no plaque, no history, only silence. Buildings made of bonecrete and choirglass loomed like broken teeth. Statues shattered. Windows melted by plasma fire. Every wall was marked with the same word, over and over again in different dialects, different scripts, carved with nails and last tools. Why? Russ moved through the streets like a ghost. His footsteps were soft despite his size. His eyes drank in everything, details others might miss. The pile of toys melted together in a crater, the skeletons kneeling in lines outside of what once had been a chapel, the burned remains of books beneath a shattered lectern, their pages turned to ash mid-prayer. At the center of the city stood a cathedral, or what was left of one. Its roof had caved in. Its altar had been defaced, not by enemies, but by those who once worshipped there. Holy sigils burned off the walls with precise, careful fire, as if the people had wanted to undo their faith. Malchior stood beside the ruins of a pulpit. He ran his fingers over a broken symbol, half of the Aquila, the other half twisted into something. Serpentine. "Have you ever wondered," Malchior whispered, "why belief requires blindness?" Russ looked away. "I was taught not to wonder." "But you're wondering now." Russ did not answer. Instead, He pulled the crystal shard from his armor and pressed it into a still functioning cogitator. The machine resisted at first. Then the shard pulsed, and the system obeyed. The chamber came alive with holograms. Dozens, number, hundreds, faces, moments, images frozen in time. The remembrancer's name flickered into the air. Celine Ardent, Imperial Historian, Order of the Quill. Her voice filled the room, soft, exhausted. This is my final record. If you find this, know that I tried. The images danced around them. A crowd gathered in joy. Parades for the Ultramarines. Guilliman himself, descending in silver and blue, surrounded by heralds and flags. We thought we were saved, Selene said. When the Lord Commander arrived, we praised his name. He spoke of rebuilding, of strength, of unity. The image shifted. The same crowd, days later, now silent, now afraid. Then came the compliance edicts. More images. Soldiers marching door to door. Machines scanning children. Temples being stripped and rebuilt. Teachers arrested. Scripts rewritten. Those who resisted, removed. We were told it was necessary. That our dialects, our rituals, our songs were dangerous. That deviation meant damnation. That the Imperium could no longer afford freedom. Russ's eyes narrowed. His hands curled into fists. I recorded everything, Selene whispered, because someone had to remember. The final image filled the cathedral. A boy, no more than 10, being dragged away from a woman screaming his name. A custodes stood watching, silent, his spear untouched, his eyes closed. They erased us, Selene said. Not because we rebelled, but because we doubted. We asked questions. We remembered the wrong stories. We worshipped with the wrong words. Her voice cracked. I die with the truth, not in defiance, but in mourning. The projection ended. The room was silent once more. Russ remained still, but Malchior saw it. The tremor in his breath. You understand now, Malchior said. This is the Imperium you once bled for. Russ turned slowly. His voice was low, guttural. No, this is the Imperium my father bled for. He looked down at the broken altar, then at the walls. Faith twisted, truth weaponized, obedience over memory. He raised his eyes. They were burning now. But memory returns. A sound echoed in the distance. Not a machine. Footsteps. Malchior's face shifted. He pulled a scanner from his robes. Someone else is here. The shadows in the cathedral stirred, and from them stepped a figure. Tall, robed in black and silver. Armor older than the Indomitus. A mask carved like a death mask. Eyes glowing red. On his chest, the mark of the Inquisition. A double-headed aquila crossed by a burning sword. But beneath that symbol, faint, nearly erased, was a different sigil. Russ's voice cracked as he recognized it. Librarius. The figure bowed his head. You remember, he said. Russ stepped forward. Who are you? The figure removed his mask. His face was not aged, not youthful either, timeless. His eyes were bright but tired. I was once Librarian Aldrian of the Thousand Suns, he said, before Prospero burned. Before Magnus fell, Russ did not reach for his blade. He remembered the man, barely. You were there when it began, Russ said. And now, Aldarian whispered, I'm here to help end it. The snow fell like ash on their axes, not drifting softly, but falling, heavy, deliberate, blanketing the ruins in white silence. Russ stood beneath the ruined arches of the cathedral, his eyes fixed on Aldarian, librarian of the forgotten past, exile of the Thousand Suns. He did not speak. Not yet. Old ghosts were stirring. Aldarian's armor bore marks hidden beneath the sigil of the Inquisition. scars and etchings carved by time, battles and shame. Runes once aglow with psychic fire had been dulled, sealed by devices Russ could not fully understand. Witchcraft bound by dogma, sorcery buried beneath sanctioned lies. Malchior broke the silence. "You walk in the flesh of our enemy," he said, hand poised over the trigger of his arc pistol. "How many of your kind still hide beneath holy robes?" Aldarian met the threat without flinching. "Fewer than you imagine, and fewer still with the courage to speak truth." Russ held out a hand, signaling silence. "I remember you," he said. "Prospero. You stood with Magnus at the gates, and you did not raise your hand when the city burned." Aldarian lowered his head. "No, I stood still. I watched our brothers butcher each other, and I chose silence." His voice was quiet, controlled, but Russ could hear it, the weight beneath the words, guilt or something deeper. "You have no right to be here," Russ growled. "Your kin brought warp and ruin to mankind. You defied the edict of Nicaea. You turned knowledge into heresy." Aldarian didn't argue. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, removing a scroll from his side, a sealed fragment of parchment, marked not by the sigil of the Inquisition, but by something far older, a serpent devouring its tail. "The Ouroboros." Russ's eyes narrowed. "That's forbidden." Aldarian nodded. "Yes, and yet it is also true." He opened the scroll. Projected in the air before them came fragmented recordings, glimpses of meetings long erased from record, robed figures seated around a black iron table, data streams weaving across vox feeds, doctrines rewritten, whole sectors condemned in silence, the High Lords of Terror, the Ordo Redactus, and at the center of it all, a single figure in golden armor, face shrouded in light, the Lord Commander, Guilliman. Russ did not look away. Aldarian spoke low, almost reverently. "The Imperium, you remember, no longer exists. Guilliman has become what he once feared. He preserves the Empire, yes, but at what cost? Knowledge is now heresy. Thought is rebellion. The very history of the Great Crusade has been rewritten to fit a doctrine of survival." He stepped closer. "They erased Neraxis because its people remembered a truth older than the ecclesiarchy. A truth that questioned divinity, that saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who once bled, once feared, once loved." Russ turned his back. His voice was gravel. "The Emperor forbade worship. He warned us of what would come. And yet," Aldarian said softly, "now he is worshipped more than any Chaos god." Silence. Malchior moved to speak, but Russ raised a hand. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come to me?" Aldarian unsealed a second shard from his belt, identical in shape to the one Selene had carried, but darker, fractured. "It's happening again," he said. "Whole sectors are vanishing. Not from the warp, from memory. Entire planets, rewritten by decree. Libraries burned, machine spirits silenced. Even the black ships are changing their routes, collecting more than psychers now." He looked Russ in the eye. "They fear you, Leman Russ. Not because you are a Primarch, but because you remember Russ turned away, his breath misting in the cold air. I remember too much," he said. "I remember Prospero. The howls, the screams. I remember striking down my brother because he told me to." He turned back, and for a moment, the godlike fury that once shattered worlds lit his eyes. "Tell me, sorcerer, what makes you think I would stand beside the same lies that shattered my legion?" Aldarian did not blink. "Because you are no longer his hound." He stepped forward. "You are the last wolf in the dark." And for the first time in decades, Leman Russ said nothing. Because it was true. He had wandered the stars for centuries, escaping, searching, avoiding the call. And now the storm had found him again. Later, as night fell over the city's ruins, Malchior confronted him in the shadow of a broken tower. "You cannot trust him," the tech priest said. "His blood is poison." "He was born of Magnus Russ," nodded slowly. "I know." "And yet you consider this alliance?" Russ looked to the sky, to the stars that no longer shone the same way. "What choice do we have?" he whispered, "when even the truth has become heresy?" He closed his eyes, and the memory of Celine's voice echoed in his mind. "I die with the truth, not in defiance, but in mourning." He opened them again, and the last of his doubt was gone. The wolf would howl once more. The moon of Carth Vallis had not seen sunlight in 10,000 years. It drifted like a forgotten tomb through the void, silent, cursed, and erased from imperial charts by edict of the Ordo Redactus. Even the stars above it blinked warily, as though unwilling to shine upon its dead soil. Leman Russ stood upon the fractured obsidian surface, a ghost among ghosts, the frost from his breath clinging to his beard in the vacuum. Beneath them, the vault of the Null Codex awaited, and with it, answers or damnation. Aldarion walked beside him, unmasked now, his eyes hollowed by memories no man should carry. Malchior followed reluctantly, his footsteps cautious, the sensors of his mechadendrites twitching in protest at the unnatural signals bleeding from the stone. The vault's gates loomed like the broken ribs of a giant black pylons covered in runes carved not by human hands nor Xenos, but something older, something that made even the warp itself shrink back. Russ spoke first. "You said this place was sealed during the First Heresy." Aldarion nodded. "Sealed by the Emperor himself. Not to contain evil, but to hide a truth too dangerous to endure." Malchior's vox clicked in irritation. "My sensors detect null gravitic harmonics, temporal fluxes. This place should not exist." Russ placed a hand on the gate. Beneath his touch, the stone shuddered. It did not open. It remembered. He whispered a name, not one given to him, but one he had not spoken since the day the Emperor lay dying. Thoros. The gate sighed open like a corpse exhaling its final breath. Inside was a crypt without light, not darkness, absence. Even the glow of Malchior's lumen strips bent and warped, like light itself feared to intrude. The walls were inscribed with imagery, ancient murals scorched into the blackstone. A throne not of gold, but of chains. A god-king bound in flame. Armies of light becoming blind, stars devouring themselves. In the center, a pedestal. Upon it, a single object. A book bound in what looked like obsidian hide. No pages, no ink. Only thought, only memory. The Null Codex. Aldarion approached first, his voice low, almost reverent. It was said the Codex held the thoughts the Emperor dared not speak. Truths born in fire. Knowledge that could not be destroyed, only forgotten. He reached for it. Russ caught his arm. What if it's a trap? Aldarion did not resist. It is. And it always has been, but not one set by the warp. By him he gestured to the murals. You've always wondered, haven't you? Why your father sent you against your own brothers. Why you, the loyal wolf, were made executioner, while others were allowed to fall. Russ stared long at the Codex. Something in him pulled away. Another part leaned forward. Malchior's sensors shrieked suddenly. Contact inbound. Multiple void signatures. Cloaked. One of them. Isn't Imperial. Russ turned. Who? Malchior looked up. Something old. Something like you. And then the darkness screamed. Explosions tore through the vault ceiling as drop torches flared from orbit, plasma burns carving new wounds into the stone. From the smoke came warriors in black, a dozen inquisitorial assassins, robed in shadow armor, each bearing marks of silence, agents of the Ordo Sicarius Obscura. But at their center walked a figure unlike the others, tall, armored in relic plate of red and bronze, and beneath the helm, eyes of gold and fire. She removed her helm slowly, and Russ staggered back. "Freya," he whispered. The woman looked at him not with recognition, but with purpose. "Leman Russ," she said coldly, "you have broken the Lex Obscura. You stand with heretics. You seek the Codex Null. By authority of the High Lords of Terror, you are condemned." Aldarion stepped between them. "She's not who she was." "That's not your daughter anymore," Russ growled low, voice cracking. "What have they done to her?" Freya raised a weapon, an ancient blade etched with runes from the Allfather's vaults, a blade Russ himself had once gifted her when she was still mortal, when she still remembered his name. "They erased her," Aldarion said softly. "Made her a ghost to kill the past." Malchior activated his shielding array, Vox chatter bursting across the comms. "No time. War formations incoming. We must choose, fight or fall back." Russ didn't move. He stared into the eyes of the weapon his daughter had become, a daughter reborn as executioner, like him. "Stand down," he pleaded, but Freya did not blink. "You should have stayed in the void, Father," she whispered, "where ghosts belong." And then the vault became war. Aldarion unleashed psychic shields, his mind flaring against the null field, staggering. Malchior's mechadendrites lashed, rerouting power as pulse blasts ricocheted around them. Russ did not raise his blade. Not at first. He couldn't. He watched her move, each strike a mirror of his own teachings, her stance, her breath, every movement a reflection of his memory. But she was no longer his. The blow came fast. She struck low, blade humming. He caught it with his axe, sparks flaring, and for a moment there was silence between them. "Why?" he asked again. Freya's voice cracked, just once. "Because I had to forget you to serve him." She struck again, and this time Russ did not hesitate. Steel met steel, father against daughter, memory against erasure. The Null Codex pulsed behind them, alive now, pages unfolding not with words but with visions, of a man on a golden throne, of a wolf howling at the edge of eternity, of a choice, long ago, that damned them all. The battle had ended, but the echoes had not. The vault of the Null Codex lay in ruin, its great pylons cracked and broken, silent monoliths weeping sparks and dust into the dark. Shattered fragments of blackstone drifted like frozen tears through low gravity. The walls, once etched with visions of fire and forgotten gods, now bore only the scars of betrayal. Leman Russ knelt among the rubble. His armor was torn, wolf pelt scorched and blackened. The great axe Frostclaw lay embedded in the obsidian floor beside him, bloodied and humming with residual energy. His breath came in shallow, ice-flecked gusts, beard matted with soot and memory, and at his feet lay Freya. She had not cried out when he struck her, not when her blade shattered, not even when she fell, only silence, a silence that haunted him. She had looked up at him, not with hatred, not even recognition, but something worse, pity. "I remember," she had whispered. Then nothing more. Malchior moved slowly through the wreckage, his mechanical limbs hissing, Vox signals low and reverent. He scanned the body without speaking. The glow of Freya's ocular implants had faded, her heart implant dead, her cerebral cortex unstirred by revival protocols. "She cannot be revived," Malchior said. "They made sure of it." A designed death. Irreversible Russ did not answer. Aldarion emerged from deeper within the vault, robes torn, psychic wards flickering about him like dying embers. In his arms he carried the Null Codex, now open, its pages alive with memory light. The Codex no longer hid its truth. It pulsed like a wounded heart, feeding visions into the minds of all nearby. What did she mean? Russ asked, not turning. That she remembered. Aldarion set the Codex upon a broken slab of stone. He spoke slowly, every word weighed with grief. She was broken open. In the final strike, your bond tore through the programming for one brief second. She remembered who she was, who you were, but it was too late. Russ closed his eyes. "I killed her." "No," Aldarion said. "They did. They just used your hands." There was a long silence, and then the Codex spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in thought. A psychic reverberation filled the chamber. Russ staggered as visions clawed through his mind, a throne of light cracking under weight. The Emperor, not as a god, but as a man, tired, bleeding, afraid. A war fought not only against chaos, but against truth. A war for control of memory itself. He saw terror before the unification, a world of burning skies and false gods. He saw the Primarch project, its origins far darker than told. Each Primarch not born, but harvested. Fragments of ancient beings reshaped into sons, and he saw himself, Leman Russ, not created to lead, but to erase. The executioner, the tool to silence what could not be controlled. He saw the Emperor speak in ancient halls with the sigillite, voice heavy with regret. If one should awaken, if one should remember, we must have a means to end him. He will be that means. The last weapon, Russ gasped and fell to one knee. Aldarion steadied him, his voice soft. "You were never his son. None of you were. You were fragments, keys, shackles for powers greater than this galaxy ever knew." Russ looked down at Freya, the child he had raised, the warrior he had trained. She had been a gift, a spark of humanity in the maelstrom, and they had taken her too. "So what now?" Russ rasped. "Do I become what they made me? A weapon with no master?" "No," Aldarion said. "You must choose." That is what they never planned for. They bred obedience into your bones, but you have always resisted it. Even in exile, Malchior adjusted his Vox link. The Vault's disruption has triggered ancient failsafes. Long-range augurs detect movement. Something is coming from the void, not Imperial, not Xenos. Russ rose slowly, gathering his axe. His eyes were calm now, not with peace, but with clarity. "Then we end this," he said. "No more blind loyalty. No more silence. We rip away the veil." He turned to Aldarion. "What's in the Codex that terrifies the High Lord so deeply?" Aldarion met his gaze, unblinking. The truth of the first god. The being the Emperor replaced. The source of the warp, not as chaos, but as balance. A forgotten equilibrium. The Emperor's sin was not conquering chaos, but corrupting it. Sealing half a truth and calling it order. Russ gritted his teeth. "And we're all just fragments of that theft." Malchior interrupted. "Incoming vessel detected. No IFF signal. Phase pattern. Erratic. Warp matter stabilized. It's not possible." A shape emerged in low orbit. Vast, impossible, shimmering between dimensions. A ship older than the Imperium. Older than the warp itself. The Codex glowed violently. A voice, not human, not even comprehensible, poured through the chamber like thunder spoken in reverse. Aldarion trembled. "It's found us," the being the Emperor buried in time. It calls itself. The unforgotten Russ stood over Freya's body and whispered a promise. Not to the Emperor, not to the Imperium, but to her. I will not forget. I will not be your executioner again. As the first tendrils of impossible light touched the vault, and the walls buckled beneath the weight of something beyond stars, Leman Russ raised his axe and walked toward the end of the world. The void above the vault of the Null Codex cracked like old glass under strain, light bleeding through fissures in reality. The Unforgotten had come, not as a fleet nor a god, but as an idea unshackled, a presence that did not travel through space, but reasserted itself into the fabric of memory, as if it had always been there. Russ stood unmoved as reality warped around him. The vault's dying pylons screamed with power, caught between dimensions. The Unforgotten ship, if it could be called such, was a vast, iridescent construct folding over itself in waves of unbeing, geometry that mocked human perception. Where human vessels carried engines, this one carried histories, lupin timefields woven into its hull. Malchior fell to one knee, his logic core stuttering under the data influx. Chronospatial drift collapsing. No known precedent. This being is rewriting causality. And yet, it was not the ship that struck fear into their hearts. It was the presence within. A thought older than the stars. An emotion older than matter. A memory no longer suppressed. From the heart of the Codex, a name rose. Spoken not in words but in instinct, in fear, in grief. Agera, the first god, the one before the warp. Not a god of war or plague or change, but of balance. Memory and forgetting. Life and death in equal measure. The one the Emperor killed to take dominion over the psychic sea. Aldarion clutched the Null Codex, eyes bloodshot with data overload. The Unforgotten is Agera's echo, her revenant, a piece of what was left behind when the Emperor erased her name from the galaxy's collective thought. It has survived in inversion, in the blank spaces, the lost stories, the silences we never questioned. Russ stared at the entity forming in orbit. He could feel it in his mind. It spoke not to his ears but his bones, and in it he saw himself. Or rather, what he had been shaped to destroy. I was made to unmake things like her, he whispered, but I was never told why. From orbit, the sky bled. Streams of anti-light poured down into the vault like descending rivers of memory. Where they touched the ground, truth bloomed, painfully, violently. Ruined machines sparked with images of past glories. Corpses screamed their final regrets. Walls began to pulse with hieroglyphs written in dead languages. Testaments to a time when the warp and real space coexisted in harmony. The Codex began to shake. It's calling the Codex back into itself, Aldarion gasped. The book is a fragment of Agera's essence, torn away by the Emperor and sealed. That's why Freya was here. She wasn't just a guardian. She was an anchor. And now she's gone. The Codex is vulnerable. Russ turned to Aldarion, voice steady. Then what happens if it reclaims it? Aldarion looked at him, and for the first time, the Psyker showed uncertainty. Then memory returns, and the lies that hold this galaxy together begin to fail. Outside, war horns sounded, not from orbit, but from within the vault's outer rings. Imperial forces had arrived, a battle group under the command of Chapter Master Voran of the Black Templars, overzealous, dogmatic, and utterly convinced that anything unknown must be burned. A Vox signal came through, unbidden, raw with fury. Leman Russ, you stand in violation of Imperial law and divine edict. You consort with heretic psychers and Xenos machines. Surrender now or be judged. Russ laughed, not in joy, but in bitter, tired recognition. They still believe I serve them. He turned to Malchior. Bring the codex. We move. Move where? Malchior asked. Russ looked up at the sky, where the impossible ship pulsed like a heartbeat across time. To the source. To her. We end this. One way or another, Aldarian's voice was a warning. You understand what she is? If she takes the codex, the veil falls. Every lie, every betrayal, the Horus heresy, the truth of the Primarchs, the Emperor's war against the warp, it all becomes known. Russ nodded. And if we don't, we keep killing our own in the name of shadows. Aldarian hesitated, then handed him the codex. Just then, the vault's walls exploded inward. Black armored space marines surged in, chainswords roaring, bolters raised. By his will, they cried. But Russ had no time for war cries. With a roar that shook the stone, he leapt into them, axe a blur of fury and sorrow. The fight was swift and brutal. He fought like a force of nature, not in rage, but in cold, righteous defiance. Behind him, Aldarian and Malchior activated the phase beacon embedded in the codex. Reality bent, and the trio vanished in a pulse of blinding white. They reappeared within the Unforgotten's vessel, and suddenly there was silence. They stood within a cathedral of light and shadow, not built, but remembered into being. Memory statues lined the walls, depictions of galaxies lost, civilizations extinguished before memory could preserve them. And at the center, she waited. Egera. Her form was ever shifting, sometimes human, sometimes impossible. Her voice was every voice Russ had ever heard, layered in harmony. You remember me, she said, not as question, but statement. I remember everything, Russ replied. The wars, the blood, the lies. She stepped closer. You were never meant to forget. He feared that one of you might remember love, or sorrow, or me. Russ clenched his fists. Then why bring me here? She extended a hand. Because I do not want vengeance. I want balance. And you can choose. Give me the codex. Restore what was taken. Let the galaxy remember. Russ looked down at the book, pulsing with ancient life, and he hesitated. He saw Freya's face. He saw the burning of Prospero. He saw the Emperor's eyes, not divine, but desperate. A choice hung before him. Give the codex to the Unforgotten and reveal the truth to the galaxy, or destroy it forever and preserve the illusion of order. Behind him, Aldarian whispered, choose wisely. For this is not the choice between good and evil. It is the choice between truth and survival. Russ raised the codex, and the galaxy held its breath. The moment Leman Russ opened the codex, time fractured, not in a burst of sound or light, but in reversal. Across the ship of the Unforgotten, echoes surged backward. Stars undid themselves in the distance. Languages forgotten by reality clawed their way back into thought. Entire battlefields, buried for millennia, shimmered into partial being before vanishing once more. Memories unforgotten. And then it stopped. Russ still stood in the vaulted chamber, but the codex was empty, its pages blank, yet unbearably heavy, each one screaming with silence. Egera stared at it, a soft frown folding across her impossible face. You hesitate, she said. I did not give it to you, Russ answered. I opened it for myself. Egera said nothing, and in that silence, the shape of truth filled the room. He saw the beginning, not of man, but of thought. Before the warp was chaos, it had been balance, a spiritual counterweight to the raw matter of real space. Egera was the custodian of that era, neither god nor tyrant, but remembered necessity. And then came the Emperor. She did not resist him. She warned him. But to make the galaxy in his image, he needed absolute control. Memory had to be replaced by ideology, truth by order. Aegera was undone, not by war, but by forgetting. Her name was scrubbed from every mind, her symbols inverted into falsehood, her essence shattered into pieces, one of which became the Codex itself. And now she was but a mirror, a shard waiting to be restored. Russ staggered back, the weight of revelation more terrible than any blade. It was always about control, he whispered, even with us. The Primarchs. We were not sons. We were vessels. You were built to command, Aegera said gently, but not to question. That was your flaw, and your freedom. Behind them, Aldarian cried out. His hands clutched his head as his psychic mind cracked under the pressure of memory. Malchior stood frozen, locked in communion with 1,000 machine spirits screaming with new, impossible data. And high above, the galaxy reacted. The unforgotten signal bloomed outward through the warp, subtle at first, like a whisper threading through dreams. But to psychers across the Imperium, it was a scream. Thousands wept as truths once buried returned. Astropaths convulsed. Eldar seers recoiled in fear, and the black ships of the Inquisition burned. In the segmentum solar, the Emperor stirred on his golden throne. A flicker of motion across a corpse barely alive. Just enough, just enough. On Terra, the High Lords felt a terror they could not name. Entire archives erased themselves. Servitors screamed in binary. Something ancient had reawakened, and it remembered everything. Back aboard the Unforgotten's vessel, Russ turned toward Aegera. Why show me this? Because you needed to choose, she said. You still do. You said you didn't want vengeance. I don't. But memory is not merciful a pause. You can still destroy the Codex, she said. Rip it from existence. Forget again. Return to your people. Be the wolf the Emperor made, the hunter, the guardian of his truth. She stepped closer, voice low and melodic. Or join me. Not as a servant, but as the first to remember, truly and fully. Help me restore what was taken. Let the galaxy grieve. Let it heal. Even if it must burn to do so. Russ's hand tightened around the Codex. His mind burned with 2 lives. He saw himself returning to Fenris, a warrior king reborn, silencing what he had seen, would be honored again, worshipped, immortal in ignorance. But he also saw the truth, millions dying under lies, worlds purged in his name, sacrifices demanded not by need, but by pride. Aegera waited. The Codex hummed in his hand, and then a whisper, not from Aegera, not from Aldarian, from within. Freya's voice. Don't forget me. Russ fell to his knees. Fenris is dying, he said quietly. The galaxy is dying. And I've killed too many in the name of silence. Aegera did not speak. So Russ rose. He held the Codex aloft, and instead of surrendering it, he broke it open. The final seal snapped. The book unfolded, not into pages, but into thought. Memory is light. Every forgotten name, every silenced truth, it poured into the warp, staining it with recollection. Aegera smiled, but it was not triumph. It was release. I remember them, Russ said softly. My brothers. The ones lost to madness. The ones damned by loyalty. The ones who fell because we were never told the truth. The Unforgotten ship began to unravel, not in destruction, but in ascension. It was no longer needed. The Codex had served its purpose. Aegera faded, not in death, but in fulfillment. Russ stood alone in the memory storm. Behind him, Aldarian and Malchior began to recover. Across the galaxy, truths once buried surfaced like ancient ruins. But with truth comes war. On Terra, the Inquisition declared exterminatus ex veritate, a new crusade against truth-born heresies. Across the Imperium, loyalists turned against each other, those who clung to the Emperor's myth, and those who had seen the light of memory. Civil war loomed, and Leman Russ, Wolf King, forgotten son, was now at the center of it, not as a tool, but as a choice made flesh. In the shadows of the galaxy's edge, war began not with thunder, but with whispers. Whispers of a Primarch returned, not as the Imperium's loyal hound, but as something older, something free. Whispers of truth unbound, of the codex shattered open, of memory loosed into the warp, of names once struck from history now spoken again in defiance. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the High Lords of Terror knew fear. They called it the heresy of the unforgotten. Their decree was swift. Leman Russ was to be declared excommunicate traitoris. Fenris was quarantined by edict. The Space Wolves, fractured, confused, wounded, were summoned to Terra for clarification of loyalty. None returned. The Inquisition's black ships scoured the chapters, extracting every memory of Russ's reawakening. What they could not erase, they burned. But the Imperium could not purge what it could not contain. For Russ had left the shadows. In a hidden system within the Ghoul stars, a fleet unlike any other gathered, a fleet not forged from loyalty or conquest, but from those haunted by truth. Eldari corsairs, drawn by ancient visions, tech priests exiled for forbidden thought, renegade chapters bitter from betrayal, even Xenos, who had glimpsed the edges of human memory and found kinship in its scars. And at the center, aboard the newly forged vessel, Svarog, stood Leman Russ. He bore no title. He carried no banners. He needed none. His presence alone was enough. For he had become what even the Emperor could not foresee, a symbol not of loyalty, but of consequence. His armor no longer gleamed in gold and wolf-fang. It was forged from darkened iron, scarred by flame and frost, etched with runes not of Fenris, but of names forgotten and remembered again. On his shoulder, he bore a single mark, the Eye of the Unforgotten. Aldarion, pale and gaunt, served as his voice across the psychic void. His gift had changed. He no longer saw possible futures. He saw buried pasts, each one a torch to ignite rebellion. And Amalcure, once a Magos of Mars, now led the Iron Choir, a sect of machine souls that had broken from the noosphere and remembered Mars before the Emperor's flame. Russ called not for war, but for reckoning. Broadcasts reached across the stars, not in commands, but confessions, testimonies of lies long kept, the truth of the Thunder Warrior's slaughter, of the lost Primarchs, of the monstrous price paid for unity. Not propaganda, memory, untouched, unaltered, and it shook the Imperium. Entire worlds stopped their industry to listen. Chaplains turned off their voxcasters mid-sermon. Battle brothers wept in silence. The Sisters of Silence wept not at all, but refused their duties for the first time in centuries. Custodians stared into the depths of the Eternity Gate and felt a weight even they could not bear. Then the retribution came. From the Eye of Terror surged a black crusade, led not by Abaddon, but by something older, something drawn by the Codex's breach. The warp had remembered too, and it hated. Demons, long chained to oblivion, surged forth in forms shaped by forgotten guilt. The first to fall were not planets, but shrines. Shrines to heroes who had never been. The Inquisition declared it all a lie, a warp-born deceit, a grand delusion. But truth has a gravity. More and more came to Russ's side. not out of rebellion, but hunger for honesty, for meaning beyond blind loyalty. The Imperium had always crushed rebellion, but now it faced a revolt not of arms, but of memory, and that it could not fight with bolters. Aboard the Svarog, Russ sat in silence. Before him hovered the reconstructed remnant of the Codex, the fragment of names, now reduced to a sphere of light, flickering with unstable truth. He spoke to no one, yet his words echoed in the chamber. They will call this treason. Let them. They called Horus a traitor when they made him a weapon. They called Magnus a heretic when they silenced his warnings. They called Conrad mad when he spoke prophecy. A long pause. I do not seek to break the Imperium. I seek to unmask it. Let those who remain do so with open eyes. Aldarion knelt, trembling. The eye is watching. I know, Russ replied. They are coming. I know that too. And far beyond, from the shadows of Saul, an ancient presence stirred. A figure no longer fully alive, no longer fully bound. The Emperor opened his eyes for the first time in 10,000 years, not in rage, not in pride, but in recognition. He remembered his son. He remembered Leman, and what he had become. The Sol system had not known war in 10 millennia. Its walls were fortress moons, its skies thick with Aegis fleets, its stars watched by the unsleeping eyes of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. But on the 13th day of the month now struck from imperial calendars, Svarog emerged at the edge of the system, not in secrecy, but in silence. No declaration, no warning, just presence. And the void itself shuddered. The High Lords of Terror screamed for retribution. Grey Knights deployed en masse. The Phalanx, dormant for centuries, surged into position. But Leman Russ did not come to conquer. He came to speak. Within the heart of the Svarog, beneath its frost-wreathed altar of memory, Russ prepared. His breath came slow, misting in the cold that came not from systems, but from the thing they carried, the fragment of names, now pulsing with unbearable weight, the Codex unbound. The voices of the lost sang from its core. Hundreds of tongues, some human, some not, all whispering truths once buried by flame. Malchior approached, his metal fingers shaking with emotion, could not suppress. They won't listen. They must, Russ murmured. They've rewritten too much. Truth is treason. History is a weapon. I am a weapon too, Russ replied, and there was no triumph in it, only grief. Across the bridge, Aldarion screamed and collapsed, his eyes blazing with psychic flame. The warp surged through him, not malicious, but mournful. They remember, he choked. They all remember now. They dream of what was, the Primarchs, the Thunder Warriors. Unity Russ stood over him, lowered his head. And do they hate me for it? Aldarion shook, sobbing. They miss you. On Luna's surface, the final meeting was arranged. A forbidden ritual, parley within the cradle of unity. Russ stepped from the drop pod alone. No honor guard, no retinue. Only the Codex fragment cradled in one arm, and a silence so profound that the very surface of the moon seemed to listen. They met him, not with guns, but with his voice, projected across every mind in the system. The voice of the Emperor. It was not thunder. It was not rage. It was sorrow. Why, my son? Russ stood still, because I remember what you forgot. He set the fragment upon the stone. It began to open, and all of Luna screamed. Images poured forth, raw, unfiltered, absolute. The fall of the Thunder Warriors, the erasure of the lost Primarchs, the caging of the warp, the deal with the void-born intelligences to bind the Astronomicon, the day the Emperor chose order over truth, 1,000 lies whispered across 10,000 years, now unraveling in seconds. And then, silence. The fragment dimmed. Russ looked to the sky, and there, descending upon him, was the figure of the Emperor, not in armor, not upon a throne, but as he was before unity, the man who had walked among the tribes, whispered hope in dark places, taught peace before conquest. The mask of divinity had fallen, and Russ fell to his knees. Why did you let them make a god of you? The Emperor knelt beside him. I did not let them. I needed them to, and in that moment, the lie was complete. The final truth laid bare. Immortality had not been a gift. It had been a burden, a cage, a necessity born of guilt. The Emperor had bound himself to the golden throne not to rule, but to contain what he had unleashed, a firewall between man and madness. And the Primarchs, they were never sons, they were weapons, moulded in desperation, shaped not for love, but for atonement. Russ wept, not as a warrior, but as a child who had finally learned the truth of his father. And in that pain, he made his choice. He offered the fragment to the Emperor. You can destroy it, he whispered. The Emperor took it, held it, and said nothing. Then slowly, he knelt before Russ. The galaxy shifted. No longer father and son, just two men, broken by time, bound by choice. The fleets above watched in silence. The chapter masters, the inquisitors, the custodians, the sisters of silence. None dared move, not when truth knelt before truth. Then one voice, across the warp, across memory, across time. Aldarion, they see you, all of them, and they remember. In that moment, rebellion ended, not with fire, but with forgiveness. And far above, in the heart of the phalanx, a single inquisitor, grey-haired, old beyond reckoning, erased a name from the list of the traitors. Russ Leman. Status, unclear. Condition, remembered. The void did not scream, it watched, as terror held its breath, as a billion astropaths wept blood from the visions that shattered their dreams. The memory of Leman Russ, the living relic, the woven son, the forgotten executioner, was no longer a myth. He was real, present, and unbound. But so too was the truth. The Codex fragment had torn the veil. The Imperium stood at the edge of revelation and madness. For 10,000 years, its foundations had been iron law and holy fiction. The Emperor was the throne. The Primarchs were demigods. The heresy had been a war of evil and loyalty, light and darkness, simple. Now, nothing was simple. The truth was no longer a sword, it was a mirror, and all who looked into it saw themselves, naked of myth, stripped of delusion, and they did not like what they saw. The High Lords convened in the deepest levels of the Imperial Palace. Cloaked in shadow and dread, they spoke in hushed tones. He has to die. Again. The wolves still stand with him. Let them. The custodes will cleanse them all. But it was the Lord Inquisitor Verat who said what none wished to hear. The Emperor will not allow it. That silence was deafening, because they all felt it too. Something had changed in the throne. A shift, a withdrawal. The Emperor no longer roared. He listened, and Russ's voice echoed in him still. Meanwhile, Leman Russ stood at the edge of the world, atop the Helica bastion on Luna. He stared into the stars. His armor, ancient Fenris-forged ceramite, was cracked in places where no weapon had touched it. Time had worn him more than war. His once golden mane was streaked with silver. His voice, now deepened by silence, spoke rarely, but he was not alone. Aldrian sat beside him, a psyker drained by revelation. Malchior remained, recording every breath of history with trembling hands. Even Jorin, the traitor brother, had returned, his own secrets cracked open by the Codex's vision. They waited for war, but it never came. Instead, a delegation approached, clad in robes of black and gold, the Sigillites' emissaries. There had not been a Sigillite since Malcador had turned to ash, but the title had passed through shadows, through whispers, until it became a function, not a man. And now it had come to speak with Russ. She stood tall, grey-eyed, with a chain of memory tokens draped across her neck, each one containing secrets enough to collapse a sector. "Russ," she said. He did not turn. "You've come to arrest me." "No," she replied. "I've come to ask you." His brow furrowed. "Ask me what?" She stepped forward, held out a sealed device. "To return." Russ turned slowly. His face, carved in lines of sorrow, flickered with confusion. "Return to what?" "To the council," she said. "To the throne." To the Imperium, Russ laughed. It was not mirthful. "I told them the truth. They would have had me flayed. Some still might. Then why this? Because the Emperor still listens. And he wants you there." Those words struck deeper than any blade, because it meant the Emperor had changed, or remembered who he had once been. And in that, Russ saw what he had long feared: hope. It was the most dangerous weapon of all. Back on Terra, the storm began to churn. In the Chapel of Concordance, where statues of the Primarchs still stood tall, cracks appeared, not from decay, but from the weight of doubt. Pilgrims no longer wept for saints. They questioned them. Why did they leave? Why were two forgotten? Why does the Emperor sit in silence now that a son has returned? And across the stars, ancient things stirred. In the eye of terror, demons whispered of an awakening. In the webway, the Harlequins laughed no more. In the Black Library, a single page turned for the first time in an age, the name upon it, Russ. And so, on the dawn of the 13th day since the fragment had opened, the Council of Final Light was convened. The Emperor did not speak. He merely watched. And in that throne room of shadows and myth, Russ stepped forward. No chains, no lies, just truth. "I come not to lead," he said, "nor to kneel. I come because I remember what this was meant to be." His voice echoed in the chamber, challenging everything. Not a church, not a prison, not a machine of endless death, but a hope. A ripple passed through the gathered lords. Some were moved, some were enraged, some afraid. Russ turned to the golden throne. "I do not ask forgiveness, nor absolution. I ask one thing, choose." And the Emperor stirred, not in body, but in mind. The air thickened, the warp grew silent, and across Terra, every astropath wept the same word: soon. As the council dissolved, the decision left unspoken. Russ knew the war had only just begun, not with blades, not with bolters, but with memory. The greatest heresy was not betrayal, it was remembrance. The stars were not dying, they were watching. Cold and silent, they bore witness to the end, not of a war, not even of a man, but of a myth. And what remained when myth died? Truth. Terror no longer wept. In the wake of the Council of Final Light, a strange quiet had fallen over the cradle of humanity. No proclamations were issued, no victories declared. The ecclesiarchy fell silent in their pulpits. The Inquisition sealed its vaults. The High Lords vanished behind fortified bastions. Because in the centre of the palace, beneath the throne, something was changing. The Emperor was no longer still, not in body, which had long since become relic, but in thought. The Astronomicon flickered. For the first time in 10,000 years, the psychic beacon that guided ships across the galaxy, dimmed. A single pulse shuddered through the warp. It was not a command, not a scream. It was a question. And to that question, only one man answered. Leman Russ stood alone at the gates of the throne room. Behind him, the wolves waited, silent and unmoving. To his right, Malchior recorded with shaking hands. To his left, Jorin knelt, stripped of pride. And Aldarion, his mind scarred by the Codex's visions, had taken a vow of silence. They had followed him to the edge. But the next step, only he could take. He walked. Every footstep echoed through eternity, through 10,000 years of faith and fire, through the blood of Horus and the silence of dawn, through the death of Ferrus and the madness of Kurz. And when the great gates opened, when the light of the throne blazed across his scarred face, he did not kneel. He remembered. He remembered Fenris, where his brothers had feasted, laughing like gods before the long war. He remembered Prospero, where his blade had cut into flesh he did not want to harm. He remembered the final words of the Emperor, not of conquest, but of sorrow. I did not mean for this. And he remembered himself, not as executioner, not as warrior, but as son. The throne pulsed. There was no voice, no booming decree, no miracle, only a memory, shared in silence. Russ stood before the Emperor and saw him, not as the Imperium saw him now, the master of mankind, the corpse god, but as he had once been, father. And in that moment, Russ finally understood. The heresy had not been a war between light and darkness. It had been a failure of love, a family broken by ambition, by silence, by the cruelty of destiny. And now, Russ could end it, not by returning, not by ruling, but by leaving, truly. He turned to Malchior, who clutched his data slate as if it were a holy relic. Erase it, Russ said softly. My lord, all of it. The Codex, the visions, the truth. Malchior froze. But humanity must know. They are not ready, Russ said. Not yet. One truth begets 1,000 lies, and we've bled enough for both. Malchior wept. But he obeyed. To Jorin, Russ gave the Fang's blade, the ancient sword of the Wolf King. You will rebuild, not with fire, but with mercy. I am not worthy, Jorin whispered. No one is, Russ replied. That's why we must try. To Aldarion he gave nothing, only a look, and in that gaze was understanding. The Psyker bowed and did not speak. And then Russ looked back, one final time, at the throne, at the Emperor, at the dream, and he smiled, not in triumph, but in forgiveness. I release you, he said. I release you, Father. And with that, Leman Russ walked away, into shadow, into legend, into nothing. No one saw where he went. Some say he vanished into the webway, seeking lost brothers. Others claim he wandered the stars, spreading forgotten truths in secret. And some, whispering quietly in the dark corners of the galaxy, believe he became something else. Not a Primarch, not a god, but a myth that chose to die, so others might live. Centuries passed. The Imperium endured, as it always did, bleeding, burning, surviving. But in quiet places, far from the light of the Astronomicon, some still tell stories of a warrior with eyes like ice and a voice like thunder, of a king who walked away from a throne, of a son who forgave his father and became free. In the end, the stars did not mourn. They simply bore witness, as one era ended and another, quietly, gently, began. The wolf had left the mountain, and and the galaxy would never be the same.